spiral! Hello, I'm doing a book review, and the book I want to review is Uzumaki. Now, Uzumaki is a manga written and illustrated by Junji Ito. I probably butchered his name. Now, for those of you who don't know what a manga is essentially a Japanese comic book or graphic novel. Now, Uzumaki was first published in Japan as a manga series which was published between the years 1998 and 1999, but later on all the issues of the manga series were put together into 3 volumes, and later on those 3 volumes were all put together in the form of one graphic novel. Now, I want to give a bit of a shout out and a thank you to my friend Cam, who recommended this book to me. Now, my friend Cam, he's shown up in a few of my short films, and he also showed up in my Blair Witch review. But Cam is a huge fan of mangas and anime and stuff like that, and we were in a bookstore and we came across a copy of this book, and he's a big fan of this book, and he more or less shoved the book in my hands and forced me to buy it, and I cannot thank him enough for forcing me to buy this book, because I absolutely loved this book. And I'm not a huge manga reader, but he highly recommended this book to me, and I have to say that this is one of the most unique and bizarre horror stories I have ever read. Now, the premise of Uzumaki is it's about this small coastal town in Japan which is cursed by some kind of a supernatural force, and this supernatural force manifests itself in the form of a spiral, and throughout the story, and even by the end of the story, you're not 100% sure what exactly this evil spiral actually is. You don't know if it's some kind of a demon or some kind of an evil god that takes on the form of a spiral, but basically the whole town is cursed by this spiral. So throughout the story, different supernatural events start happening, and all these supernatural events somehow relate to spirals, and the supernatural stuff only starts happening to certain groups of people in the beginning of the story, but as the story goes on, the entire town starts witnessing these supernatural events, and throughout the story you see the social order in this town completely collapse. Now, the book primarily follows this young girl named Kiri and her boyfriend Sorichi. I probably butchered his name, and I probably butchered her name too, but these are the 2 main characters of the story, and they're the first ones to notice that something is terribly wrong in their town. They're the first ones to really realize that there's some kind of curse on the town. Now, as I said before, I'm not really a big manga reader, but I have to say that Uzumaki is one of the most unique horror stories I have ever read, and if you're into, like, really bizarre and surreal horror stories, then I would definitely recommend this book. And the book is just insane. Like, in this story, some of these supernatural events that start happening because of this spiral curse include people turning into snails, you also have possessed hair, and you have mosquitoes that turn pregnant women into vampires that give birth to mushroom babies. You have a hurricane that literally has a mind of its own. Like, there's so much bizarre stuff in this book. Now, the structure of this story is actually really interesting, because the book begins kind of like your traditional linear narrative, but then the but then the chapters become very episodic to the point where each chapter almost acts as a standalone story, and the book almost becomes like a collection of interlocking stories, but then by the end of the book, it all becomes like a self-contained linear story again. But yeah, I absolutely loved Uzumaki, and one of the things I liked about this book is it's kind of like a mixture between psychological horror and more visceral kind of horror. Like, because it is gory, like there's a lot of gore in this book, there's a lot of really bizarre, like, transformation sequences in this book, but there's something very psychological about it all, because you realize that this curse is also causing the people in the town to kind of go crazy and kind of lose their perception of reality, because supernatural stuff starts happening around people in the town, and people notice it, yet they don't react to it the way a normal person would react to something supernatural happening. Like, they certainly think it's weird, but they're not, like, freaking out or anything, and you could almost assume that this curse is, like, altering their perceptions of reality. So in that aspect, it's very psychological, and the opening chapter of this book, where you find out that a certain character's father is becoming obsessed with spirals, that part of the book is also very psychological, because it's about this guy going insane. So once again, the book is kind of a mix between psychological horror and more visceral kind of horror. The book also kind of works as a body horror story, because in this story, there's certain points where, like, human characters physically change, and there are certain aspects of this book which are very much body horror. Also, throughout this story, you get such a feeling of dread, because you really do get the idea that there's nothing that these characters can do to stop this spiral curse, and you really do get the idea that they can't escape from it, and by the end of the story, it becomes even more apparent that they can't escape. Also, with all the stuff involving the two main characters, the book also kind of works as a teen angst drama in a way. Also, the artwork in this book is really good as well, and you have some really creepy and disturbing images in this comic. Now, I can definitely see the influence of the stories of H.P. Lovecraft on this book. Like, the book has a lot of Lovecraftian themes in it, and specifically this book reminded me a lot of the H.P. Lovecraft novella, The Shadow over Innsmouth. I also saw kind of an EC influence on this book as well. Like, I would not be surprised if Junji Ito was in some way inspired by the EC comics. The book also reminded me a lot of Stephen King's It, in the sense that it's a story about a small town that is haunted by some kind of a supernatural force that manifests itself in different forms. Now, this book was made into a movie in 2000. Now, the movie changes a lot from the book, but I can kind of understand why the movie changed so much from the book, because the movie was only an hour and a half long, and in order to do an accurate adaptation of this book, the movie would have had to have been 4 hours long at least, and also the movie would have needed a really big budget, and the film version of Uzumaki is a relatively low-budget film, so I can kind of understand why the film adaptation of this book wasn't an accurate adaptation, because really, once again, if they were to do an accurate adaptation of this book, the movie would have been 4 hours long, and I actually do really enjoy the movie, even though it does kind of end up abruptly, I still really enjoy the film. Now, the movie was live action, but I'm actually surprised they never tried to do an anime based on this book. But yeah, that's my review on Uzumaki by Junji Ito. Once again, I'm not sure if I'm saying his name right, but that's my review on Uzumaki, and bye.